Welcome, Bruchim Habayim. I'm Rabbi Paul, your virtual rabbi, and you have found Beit Virtuale. And yes, if you've even gotten this far right now on a video that I've uploaded after you've been through Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur and now the beginning of Sukkot, and so many people are burnt out, and here is a religious synagogue activity video coming out. If you've made it this far, congratulations. We're going to move through this together. I'm still going to upload these videos because I think this information is important. So stick with me. And because I am uploading this in the middle of Sukkot, I'm going to say to you, Modim L'Simcha, which is may the center parts of our holidays be filled with joy, which is part of the point that I want to make today. First of all, I want to separate between the concept of joy, Simcha, and happiness. And a lot of languages have this differentiation, happiness being something ephemeral, joy being that long abiding thing. And I think many of us would say that that is a goal in life, is to find our ways to that abiding joy. Oftentimes the pathway by which we search for that joy is through happiness. And if we're being honest with ourselves, we use tools in order to find our way to happiness. And sometimes the tools are embarrassing to admit that that's a tool. Sometimes it's the people we hang out with, our friends, even our family. Sometimes our tools are the entertainment that we engage in, sports, the movies we watch. Sometimes our tools are the substances that we put into our body. Sometimes our tools are religion. Tools aren't bad or good in and of themselves like everything else. It's really how we use them. But for anyone who has ever been a member of any synagogue where I've been the congregational rabbi for any amount of time, you have heard me give some variation of the sermon that all of our tools work for us until they no longer work for us. Let me start into an explanation of that with something completely absurd. Last week, my football team lost, and so when they play again this week, I'm not going to wear the same shirt that I wore last week. It's completely absurd. It is a non-causal sort of thing. If my team wins or doesn't win, has nothing to do with the shirt that I wore, but I'm still going to wear a different shirt. But the thing is, I'm probably not going to change that behavior, not because it's absurd, but because I have nothing in it that's going to cause me to eventually fall or fail in my life because of it. If you want to see an example of how that looks at its worst, watch one of my favorite movies, Silver Linings Playbook, where we actually see a character who does indeed lose and engages in these same fallacies. Well, his tools did not work at all, but as long as he kept on winning money, he kept on using the same tools. Now, that's a pretty difficult example. I'm even going to go one darker because I think that this point really needs to be made. And since I'm dealing with sports analogies today, let's talk about Bobby Knight for a second. Some of you know who that is, some don't. It depends. College basketball coach, Indiana for many years. And he's either famous or infamous, depending on what you know about him, because, well, famous because he won a lot of games, Olympic coach, and very successful, but infamous because the videos came out that he was hurling chairs at his players. Turns out he was incredibly abusive. Well, that was his tool. I would argue a very bad tool. But it worked because he won, and it worked because he made a lot of money, and it worked because he got a good job, right up until the point that it didn't work, that he was found out, that society changed enough to say, you know what, abusing students is not right in any way, shape, or form. Listen, I believe we need to push students. I believe that we need to ask people to have their best performance. I believe that it is the job of a teacher or a mentor to actually demand more. But there's never a time where physical abuse is going to be a part of that. So within this message, that tool worked at some point, societally, personal, until the point that he got caught and it didn't work. And that's not how the system should actually work. We should have in our lives something put into place that allows us to acknowledge constantly and continuously that something is no longer working for us. But again, the reality is we don't change our behaviors until we have to change our behaviors. And that's a problem. So this is part of a series that I call Iterative Judaism. And iterative is like the true definition of science, this process that we constantly try to falsify information, which means how many of us engage in a life right now which is constantly justifying that everything we do is right, instead of asking the questions on, all right, how can I prove that I'm actually wrong so that I can learn something? That's the exact opposite of how we function. And Judaism has built within every holiday, every observance, every mitzvah, this ability to reflect and find out what I'm not doing right or what I need to improve, or more bluntly, which tools I've been using that no longer work, so that instead of waiting till we're hitting rock bottom, we're actually able, by an honest interaction, a deep dialogue with our tradition, to improve things as they go. Now, if you didn't see my introductory video to this, down below, the sound quality is really off. I might re-record that video. We'll see how that one goes. But I've given an introductory idea to it, and I've said that every single holiday has a question. I'll even go further. Before we had Rosh Hashanah, we had a list that we made, the Cheshbon Nefesh, the list of all the people we needed to forgive or ask forgiveness from. Well, I would say each of these holidays and observances has a list, a checklist, an item, an exercise we can go through to actually find out what we're engaging in that is that tool that is no longer working. And Sukkot, well, it's the holiday of the ephemeral. It's the holiday of engaging with what is an illusion in our lives. Now, the obvious is the Sukkah itself. Here I am in northern Germany, and it's really, really cold. And if you go outside into a Sukkah and it's raining on you, you really want to go inside into what feels protective and permanent. What if, God forbid, this floods or a storm comes through that destroys the house? God forbid on all those, but how many times have we heard on the news where something horrible happened, whatever it was, happened in any location, the people say, we never thought that that thing would happen here. Of course it's going to happen where we didn't think it was going to happen, because if we were prepared, then our interaction and reaction would be completely different. And so what I want us to do for Sukkot is to go through a series of questions, or to go through a question and a series of answers that allows us to not have to hit rock bottom on something. And on Sukkot, the question is very simply this: what illusions am I holding that I'm assuming are going to be true tomorrow that I can't guarantee are going to be true? It's the first question. And that's both the obvious and the hard one. It's the obvious one because if we really think about it, of course we know that the people in our lives, the places that we are, the jobs that we're in, we can't guarantee any of that, but it's too hard to contemplate, and so we don't really want to think about it. So I actually want to go into something we actually can work on. I want to ask questions that are answerable. And I want to do this in a way that we can actually improve some things right now in our lives. And this is the illusion of how we represent ourselves. Now, my analogy for this one is my high holidays, which were magnificent. I had a great experience in the Einheitsgemeinde in Mannheim. And as I introduced myself to people, one of the things that I did when people said, well, what are you doing since you're not full-time in a congregation right now? And I said, well, I'm working on my doctoral dissertation, which is completely true. But here's what's really funny. If you were to take a list of how I represent myself, this is what I'm doing in my life, and then I were to assign to it something that's real and tangible, falsifiable. So how many minutes a day am I spending on my doctoral dissertation? How many minutes a day am I spending on the other things that I say are valuable to me? And then I go through and I make a separate list saying how many minutes I spend a day actually doing what I'm doing. So if I say that the most valuable thing in my life right now, as far as what I do, my most valuable avocation item is my doctoral dissertation, and I find out that I'm spending 1 minute a day on that, which might be generous at this particular moment, and I'm finding that I'm spending 2 hours a day on writing scripts for videos like this, then maybe I should represent that as, what am I doing right now? I am trying to create very good online education. But then what if I'm actually spending 3 hours a day flipping through my feeds on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter? Then maybe I'm not completely aware of what tools I'm actually using in my life. So this is real. This is tangible. As tangible as making a list where one column for Rosh Hashanah says, people I need to forgive. Second column, people I need to ask forgiveness from. Third column, the circuits I've got plugged into lies and thought forms that I don't need. Well, I've got the same Cheshbon Nefesh with a slightly different question for Sukkot. Column number 1, what am I going to tell someone who asks me? If I want to represent myself in the best way, what is of value to me? What do I do? What am I doing? Who am I? List number 2, the no BS, doors closed, no one's looking at me, no one's judging me except for I have to encounter myself looking in the mirror. What am I actually spending my time doing? No holds barred. Not taken to your therapist, not taken to your rabbi, not even taken to your spouse. This is for you, me, to look in the mirror and be honest. And then to compare the two. And then go through and imagine what it's like to shake someone's hand. Remember shaking hands? Remember that? To bump fists, to bump elbows, to bow graciously, and to say, hi, I am, nice to meet you. Well, what do you do? Well, what I do is I flip through my feed on Facebook. It's tough because it hits a truth, and that's Sukkot. Sukkot asks us to let our illusions give way to a reality. A final thought before we finish this video. Once I learned a little bit about yoga, one of the most interesting aspects of yoga that I ever discovered was the Shavasana pose, which is the death pose. And when I first found out about it, I thought, well, that's a little bit morbid, a little bit macabre. What is that? Until I realized one truth, something that I'm still working on, and that's that I actually have, like many people in the West, a fear of death. Now, it's usually for most of us a fear of painful death, but a fear of the abyss, a fear of stepping into nothingness, a fear of honestly not knowing what comes next. And in yoga, the death pose, the Shavasana, is meant to rehearse for something that we have an innate fear of. It's what we're doing on Sukkot. It's the Shavasana of Judaism. We are rehearsing for when something happens that we're not protected from the rain, metaphorically and proverbially. And that's what this iterative process is all about. Judaism is not empty ritual. Judaism is thousands of years of collected wisdom. And if we don't always know how to teach it, it's not just about the ritual. Do the ritual. The Hasidic master said, when in doubt, just perform the mitzvah. We have to have a place that we can start, and then eventually those symbols start letting their wisdom come out. And the wisdom of this is what we think will never change will absolutely change. So we have to start getting in touch with it, because when most people lose their happiness and lose their joy completely, it's when the unexpected happens that was completely predictable, and we don't know how to deal with it. One of the darkest moments for a congregational rabbi is when I'm sitting there in a room and someone has lost someone and they say, I don't know how to make my tradition work for me. Well, the reality is if you haven't been praying, if you don't have a spiritual tradition, if you don't have an engagement with the prayer book, then how can you expect that to work now? And that's hard, and it's not a message I can give in a congregation. It's something I have the freedom to give only in this medium right here. If we expect Judaism to be my way out of a difficult situation, but I spend no time practicing it, that's like saying, I expect to be able to win a street fight using Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but I've never actually practiced it. I just saw a good movie. Well, why are we expecting that of our tradition? We have to practice it. It's called practice, and Sukkot is part of our practice. It's the practice of someday we're going to lose something, God forbid, but it is going to happen. And we've got a way to rehearse that. So let's go through this list. I've already started going through it. I've actually gone through and reprioritized some of the work that I'm doing. I've done a lot of writing this last week, and it's been magnificent. So join me. I'm actually feeling happiness right now from that writing. And it's leading to a little bit of joy. And some of that I haven't felt in a while. And I've done that because of this engagement with our amazing spiritual tradition. It also helps to have an amazing partner. It helps to be doing something that's filled with meaning. It helps knowing that you're out there. So let me know that you're out there. Like this video, subscribe to this channel. It really helps. We're still at the very beginning. We're not growing. We need your help to grow. Otherwise, I'm going to have to find a job, folks. So stay with me. Ask some questions. You notice that the Rebbitzin reads everything and asks great questions from you on our podcasts. And tell us what you need from this channel. We're not sure yet if you want the services, the podcast, these videos. Adult education is coming up. I'm announcing it this week in October, so be looking for our first class on Kabbalah coming up in October. In the meantime, I'll say it, we're always either lifting up or tearing down. The way to elevate this world is not by jumping on and spending 5 more minutes on Twitter yelling at someone. It's actually to find someone to lift up. In the process of doing that, we're all lifted up. So take care, and we'll see you next time.
אהבת עולם בית ישראל עמך אהבת תורה ומצוות חוקים משפטים אותנו לימדת תורה ומצוות חוקים משפטים